Welcome back to Federal Insights, sponsored by Hughes Networks here on Federal News Network. Our topic today is network transformation and modernization. My guest today is Tony Bardo, the Assistant Vice President of Government Solutions at Hughes Networks. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And Tony, just recently, literally a few weeks ago, when this airs, the White House and OMB released the return to work strategy for federal agencies and federal employees. And it was really a very wide open kind of document, leaving a lot of discretion to agencies on how and when and where they would reopen and bring people back. The implication is that they expect, and the authorities expect, and I think the agencies expect, and maybe the employees themselves expect to be working remotely and from home, and there's a distinction there, for quite some time and in larger numbers than before the pandemic hit. So mass telework is kind of a feature now in perpetuity. What does that mean for network modernization as people look at EIS? How do they need to consider that fact of many people working remotely on a regular basis?
Well, it's happening all over the place, Tom, and it certainly happened during the pandemic, and people were forced to work from home. Kids were forced to learn from home and go to school from home, and so it contributed to a large extent the internet being upside down for a while. There were corporate networks that were not being used. There were school networks that were not being used, and everybody was home using the same bandwidth. However, that bandwidth sometimes was better than what the worker had at work. You could have a field office worker that was working from his field office before the pandemic and operating on a T1 line. And that same worker went home, started teleworking, and was operating on a 200 meg cable circuit and having more bandwidth, drinking from a fire hose to some extent. To a large extent, and we talked about like for like, the early transitions on EIS might well be transitioning to T1 lines at field offices. Well, that would be a terrible mistake, as we discussed earlier. And so you have people that now will be working in a hybrid environment, going to the office maybe 2 days a week, maybe not at all, and fully teleworking. And again, these people will have pretty good networks to work from on the residential side, on the consumer side, if you will. However, are those networks the right kind of networks for somebody to do federal work, government work, where those lines need to be more secure, where the productivity of the employee at home is a factor? All of a sudden, that person is their home IT person. So if there's a problem on the network, a problem with the laptop or whatever, they've got to call their service provider and get help and get assistance. Usually you'd call your IT desk in the office and say, hey, I got a problem with the line. You guys got to fix it. And the agencies have people that can do that. You turn that workforce loose and distribute it out to the field, literally the field, which could be the home. And that's a whole different dynamic. So what worked temporarily during the pandemic without the perhaps security of the home network on the agency side, and without the IT support, the hands-on IT support to get things done, all of a sudden you've rendered that home worker in a different position, and they got to fend for themselves more. So I think the era of managed networks extended to other locations. I mean, what is the office now but another federal location, a federal site that needs to be managed by the kind of managed services that are done to the agency location. So I think it brings to get to out to in the open a real issue of support and viability, that the idea of, okay, let's send everybody home, let's understand the new dynamic, the new millennial workforce that is more used to working in a hybrid environment. Okay, that's fine, and it can be done, but it brings to bear some other things that maybe hadn't been considered and need to be.
Yes, and one of those is cybersecurity and data security,
Yeah,
especially as you
absolutely.
say, the transport between the home location and into the federal network. A lot of things can happen in both directions. So, how do some of these new EIS services that Hughes is offering and some of these new technologies enable better security, especially for that distant and teleworking workforce?
I think it's going to require a stronger and more elaborate partnership between the EIS service provider. The agencies need to choose somebody who's used to working in an environment and that's not only comfortable working in the corporate environment but also the consumer environment, because frankly those two worlds have merged now in a certain sense. And so I think the emphasis more on managed services, making that user experience, and I'm not talking about the constituent now, I'm talking about the government user experience, and making sure that they're productive and then they're not crawling under desks, looking for connections that need to be rewired or whatever. And people that a help desk that probably relies more on the private sector to bolster the certain limited federal presence, because I think you're going to have a whole lot more problems as you get more locations. All of a sudden your location inventory, if you will, of sites has doubled or tripled or even more. And so there's that aspect that needs to be considered.
Yeah, and the other issue that was raised in the return to work guidance is the idea not so much of working at home, that's part of it, but also in a telework type of center. This is an idea that was proposed about 20 years ago in the federal government. It never really took off, but the idea of multi tenancy of different agencies, different types of employees, but in one location that is remote. And the other idea is you're at home, but your home agency is not in your geographical area, but maybe you work in New Jersey and the headquarters you're working for is in Detroit or vice versa. Just making up those two ideas. So you've got a lot of combinations of where the work goes, where the work originates. And I
Well,
think people are going to be looking to EIS to maybe help solve some of that topology to make that happen.
the Patent and Trademark Office was one of the leaders in federal telework, and they have patent attorneys that are scattered all over the country, and they have a certain expertise. They want to live where they want to live, and so PTO accommodated that environment very skillfully. And so, this is going to be that many times over if we had any kind of growth in telework, which it looks like we're going to have.
But can basically these new SD-WAN technologies and the EIS types of products otherwise, can they enable, say, end-to-end encryption and data protection from point A to point B, regardless of what the 2 points are?
I think you can. I think the managed services capabilities are there. What the challenge will be is with SD-WAN. One of the elements of SD-WAN is that you have multiple transports into an office building, into a district office, a field office, whatever. You won't have that so much with the consumer type connections, and so it sort of limits your multiple ways in and out of the building, your home, your apartment, whatever. But I think the security techniques are there and capabilities are there. I think it's the multi transport kind of issues which may not be quite so available.
And for agencies that have their opportunities out for EIS, and again, these seem to be kind of stalled a little bit over time here, and maybe the pandemic stalled things a little bit further. What are the steps agencies need to take to turn those into real transitions and real acquisitions to get these new services and technologies into their agencies?
I think the decisions that have to be made in terms of awards are sort of capacity of the awardee, workforce, ability to get to the field quickly. The decision to maybe the core network, the backbone network, well, that's going to be a lot of heavy lifting. But we can get to a lot of sites and transform those sites and upgrade them from the T1 world of yesteryear into the 100 meg and the 200 meg or 150 meg, whatever world, and improve their experience quickly. You'll get quick synergies right away, not only from a performance basis, but also a cost basis. And third, as we mentioned earlier, that price performance, doubles or triples or whatever with broadband technology versus the old legacy dedicated access. So I think, a reversal of, wow, let's get that core in place first before we touch the field. That may not be the best mode when you're in catch up transition mode right now. I think you've got this deadline. It's 2023 is not far away. And I think maybe some philosophy rethinking is in play here.
And earlier, we talked about the hybrid cloud environments that most agencies are having, and we didn't really talk about the data center. And that's a locus of communications and transport for a lot of agencies and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. What does EIS, what effect does it have on data centers and how people should be thinking about modernizing their data centers?
Well, the other thing about MPLS, it was not terribly data center friendly. It was, not terribly internet friendly vis-a-vis what's available today. In its time, it was, but it's past its time. So the quicker the transport decisions and implementations are made, the faster the more productive transport will be for interactive services.
And how ready are the vendors on EIS to jump in when that opportunity turns into a contract?
Again, it depends on philosophy. What I've seen is, these are not trivial decisions. These are not trivial strategies. I get that. But months of, okay, we've done the contract. Now let's have a 7-month period of meetings before we make any real decisions. And, I'm exaggerating a little bit for effect, but the fact of the matter is you got to rethink things and traditional ways of how you transition from one old style network to the next. So the last thing, again, to make, sort of painfully make this point, transitioning like for like to a new vendor and then transitioning with that vendor, a second transition to go to modernization, that just makes no sense anymore.
All right. Well, you've got that advice out now. We've been talking with Tony Bardo, the Assistant Vice President of Government Solutions at Hughes Networks. Thanks so much.
You're welcome, Tom. Thank you.
And I'm Tom Temin. You've been listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Hughes Networks.